So when you're putting together the selfie stick and working with the joints and the limits, I just want add a couple pieces of advice to this. Um, as you go and you have these joints pop up and you want to start testing them, you can click on the little joint that pops up itself here and right click on that. And you have a couple options here. You can edit the limits. So if it goes too far out or rotates too far through another piece, if you edit limits, you can add a minimum and a maximum. So if I play, let's see, if I play this right now, let's see, this is a cylindrical one. I right click, if I animate just the joint, it ignores everything else and just gives me the joint itself. So it doesn't bring this with it. If instead I say animate the model, which is one right below it, it keeps everything else with it. Notice as it rotates, you see everything else rotating. So if it affects other parts, it might be useful to animate the model and you can see how it affects other things. Now, right now, it doesn't have any limits on it, and it just happens to, the extent of the animation they do, happens to work out well. I take that back. I didn't put any limits on the rotate. This one has both. So it'll come in looking like this, but I did put limits on the slide. And judging from where I started from, my minimum was actually below 0, and my maximum was 0. I think because my part that I used ended up right in the middle. So depending where you put the origin when you first set up that joint, your minimum might be at 0, your maximum might be at 0. You may have to test out a few places to see, okay, orient yourself as to where it is. You're going to want to add those limits to get the full credit on there. Okay, so we talked about the limits, we talked about animating the joints. Another place you can get to these is this drop down folder here that you have joints and you have all the ones here that will pop up. And if you notice, this little button pops up there to edit joint limits, and that will give you the little dimensions here. Another thing for especially this wrist joint here, I call it a wrist joint, but um, that will animate. I mean, it's just the joint. We want that going back and forth, but not going 360 because it's going to go through the part itself, right? So if I want to animate this, animate the model, and just so you know, my model is missing uh, the screw that goes in there, the one that you downloaded from the website. Mine was missing that, and I'm not going to add it right now. But to prevent this from going all the way in, I had to add limits. But my limits weren't like it's moving through 180 degrees of motion. But because of where I set up the joint, it didn't go from 0 to 180. I ended up having to go from 90 to negative 90, and that's what worked for this. And that was just kind of trial and error when I used that. I think that's all I wanted to say. At least as soon as I hit the button, I'll think of something else. But we should be good to go. Oh, one last thing. You should be able to grab a piece of this, grab one of the parts, and actually manipulate it on here on your own. That's how you can tell things are connected and kind of behaving as they should. Now, granted, you're moving a two-dimensional mouse in a two-dimensional space, trying to manipulate a three-dimensional object with several degrees of freedom. So it's going to be kind of wonky, but that's how you can kind of test to make sure things are actually connected the way you think they are. And it will do that as long as one of these pieces are grounded. Now, to ground it, I grounded the base because I figured somebody would be holding the handles. That made sense to me. In my mind, I want to right click that base and have it pop up here, but it doesn't, which is mildly annoying. But if you go over here to the browser and find the component that says stick bottom, you right click on that, you can ground there. Right now, mine was grounded. So if I unground it and I try to move it, I can't do it. It'll just move the whole thing, right? I don't want it to move the whole thing. So I can right click that, tell it to ground, and I'm going to capture the position where it is because it's moved since it was in its original place. I can either put it back to its original place or say, no, I want it to be right where it is, capture that position. So it doesn't really matter for this moment. But now I see that little red pin next to that component symbol to say that is grounded, that thing can't move. Everything else can if I grabbed components here. Excuse me, everything else can move, but then we're good to go. So I think that does it. Don't forget the pin that I forgot here, and take a look to make sure these are assembled kind of accordingly. Where you have that little wrist joint and then a little Y that goes in there. These are fixed